and adding lots of energy. Woo! And then I know I may or may not be setting myself up for success if I want a command right away after that particular scenario. Kinesthetic. And notice the change in my voice. Notice I gave him a hand signal. So he had several inputs. No push on the button. There was no leash guidance. Break. This is Keen's equipment, his collar, his remote, and this particular charger is for his remote, and this charger is for the collar. I've customized his equipment. That's why he has two separate chargers. They're for two different models of Sport Dog, and it's customized just for Keen. Okay, so let's go over the on-off button. These are waterproof units, the remote and collar. So we've got a recess button right here in the center for the on-off switch. And I usually take the point of the antenna here to turn it on and off. It's just a little bit easier than using my finger. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it on and watch this light. And you also heard 3 beeps. It's in mode 3 and the light is flashing green. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and turn it off now. So we heard 1 long beep, it flashed red, and now it's off. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back on again. Okay, so what I want to show you now is how the remote and the collar lights are when it's being used. Okay, so we've got this little light here on the remote, and the remote does not have an on and off switch, just the collar. Okay, so on one of the buttons here I'm going to push and just watch the lights. So the light on the collar is turning red and the light on the remote is green. The collar goes on in the morning and it comes off at night to go on to the chargers. I recommend that you turn the collar off before placing it on the charger. Let's go ahead and plug this collar into the charger. The charging port is here. I usually just take my fingernail and just flip this up. Again, this is a waterproof unit, so everything's tightly closed here. We've got 2 points or pins that you can see in there. On the charger, there is a little arrow. When you rub your finger over it, you can feel that it's raised up, this arrow. It only goes in one way. So I'm going to go ahead and plug it in. It goes up toward the Sport Dog logo, the arrow does right here. And it's a little bit snug because it's a new unit, so just push and make sure it's firmly in there. Over time, it will loosen up. So for the remote, let's go ahead and put this onto the charging unit. It has a little door here that's waterproof, and again, I just take my fingernail and flip it up like this. There's 2 little pins in there. There's a little groove here on the charger. I'm going to go ahead and put this in. And it does fit a little bit snug, again, because it's new and it'll loosen up over time. Okay, so that's what it looks like when the remote and the collar are plugged into the charger. I would recommend that you put the equipment in the kitchen where he's fed, and that way you can just go ahead and get his collar on in the morning and then feed him. I'm going to talk about the equipment in terms of the range and the terrain of the mountains that we live in. The equipment is good for 3/4 of a mile, but unfortunately with the mountains and the hills, being able to recall him is impossible if he goes over a hill or he goes over the mountain and you're still on the other side. What I recommend if you're working on flat land is that you can just have the remote at your side like I've shown in the videos. The other thing I recommend is that if there is some hilliness, that you have the remote up here at your chest level. If it is a little bit hillier terrain, you can extend your arm over your head which puts the antenna up higher to communicate with the receiver and the transmitter. Training collar is vinyl and moisture, if it's raining, gets trapped under here, or if he rubs his neck along the grass, sometimes debris gets up in here. I recommend that you check his neck in the evening to make sure that there's no sort of irritation or anything just going on. And I usually give him a little bit of a neck massage too after I take his collar off before he goes to bed. So everything's looking really, really good. So we're going to go ahead and put the collar on. Now the collar goes around the top part of his neck, just behind his ears. We're going to buckle it. And what we're looking for is to make sure that it's within this area that I shaved on his neck. The contact points here have to be touching his skin. So if it's up here in the rough part of his coat, since he's a double-coated dog, he may not be getting good contact. So the important point is that it's going to be put on snug like a belt in the lower part of the dog's neck and just below the ears on either side, that it can be rotated for him. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm coming up behind his ears here, up here on the top part of his neck. And I'm pulling it forward a little bit because I want to make sure it's up in that area. And I'm pulling it as tight as I can, and maybe just going back one hole after I pull it as tight as I can, and going ahead and buckling it. And then after I buckle it, I'm going to raise his head up a little bit and see if I can get my finger just barely under that contact point. If I can just barely get the tip of my finger under that contact point, I know that I've got it snug like a belt. Good boy. And I usually give him a little treat after I get it on, and at night I give him a little treat when I take it off. Good job. Very important that the leash is never attached to his e-collar. Unfortunately, Sport Dog has made a attachment point here for a leash, but never ever attach it to this, because the 2 points on the collar, if you pulled on it with the leash, would not be very pleasant for him. So you'll want to go ahead and always attach it to his regular collar, and his regular collar is always behind his e-collar. And the collar goes on in the morning and comes off in the evening. That is because we don't want him to become collar wise. When the collar's not on, dogs for a short period of time, maybe weeks, maybe a month or so, will operate in terms of doing all of their commands exactly like as if they had the collar on. But what happens is that fades over time, and what we're looking for is for a long-term habit and routine of all of his commands, and that's why the collar goes on in the morning and comes off at night. If you wish to take it off when he's taking a nap, just so his neck could rest in terms of skin integrity and just, keeping it really, really good in terms of the skin integrity, especially if it's a rainy day, I do recommend that you take it off when he takes his nap and then puts it back on when he wakes up. Remote, we have 3 buttons. We have a bottom button, we have this top button, and it has a little raised circle in the center, which you can feel easily with your finger. And we also have a side button. The bottom button here is low static stimulation. The top button is medium static stimulation. And the side button is high static stimulation. On the wheel, you'll notice here that we have VIT. VIT stands for vibrate, but it also can be programmed for tone. Right now we have it programmed for tone. We don't use either vibrate or tone with Keen. He only gets static stimulation. So this is far back as the wheel will go when you're turning it. So keep it on 1, which will be most helpful to you because he will not respond to tone. You can hear the clicks of the wheel. And it also has raised indentations here. So when you're operating the remote, holding it in your hand like this, you can hear the clicks and you can feel them with your thumb. This is the recommended way to hold the remote so that you're able to dial the numbers, which you can hear the clicks and also feel it and have it down to your side. You have that. You can also reach these buttons with your thumb. So it's one finger operation between all of these dials and buttons here. Buttons, you can either tap them, and you can see on the collar the red light coming on because I'm tapping, or you can hold the button down. Each of these buttons can be held down and it has a 10-second lockout, which means after 10 seconds, you have to pick your finger up and press it again, and you get 10 more seconds. I'm tapping it right now. I'm going to hold it, and here comes 10 more seconds. You'll see the red light remains on. Okay, and the 10-second lockout, so he's at this point not getting any static stem. And again, tap, tap, tap. I also recommend that you keep your thumb directly on the button so that you're always ready in terms of timing. If you have your finger slightly above the button like this, that is not the best timing. So go ahead and practice having your finger directly on the button but not pushing the button. Initially in your home, you'll want to look for what we call the recognition level. That's the level at which that gains Keen's focus at the lowest static stimulation. So you'll want to start on 1, and you'll want to start with just tapping the button. Let's say he's going around the floor and his nose is completely down on the floor. If you start tapping the button, you'll see his nose start to raise up, and you'll know that you're at the correct number, which is 1. If his nose doesn't raise up off of the floor, then you'll want to dial to 2 and start tapping the button to see if his nose raises up off the floor and stays up. Then you know for that moment in time that that is a 2 that he is working at, and the fit of his collar, where it is located on his neck, also goes into determining what that number is at that point. Next to fit of his collar, the most important thing that determines what number you're working at is distractions in the environment. If there are just 2 people in the home and you're carrying on with your usual routine, you'll probably have a real good indication every day what number Keen is at, which will probably be a 1 or 2. Realizing that he gets a verbal command, and if that does not complete whatever command you've asked of him, then you'll need to go ahead and set the remote to either 1 or 2 and tap to get the completeness of whatever command you've asked him. If more distractions enter the environment, for example, more people come over to your home, then you will find, since the distraction level has increased with either more dogs or people in the home, that you're dialing up on the remote to maybe a 3 or possibly a 4, or you may, and still using the bottom button, if you want to dial back to a 1, you may use the bottom button, and if you feel like you're not getting focus for completion of whatever command you've asked, you'll just move your finger up to the medium static stimulation button while it's still on 1 and go ahead and tap that. Very important, once the distractions, whether they're people, dogs, or whatever it may be that motivates Keen to chase or be off task, you'll want to make sure during those times, obviously, to increase the amount of static stem he's having to be on task. But when those distractions leave the environment, you'll want to make sure and dial back down on the remote. So if there was a lot of distractions, let's say you're working up on a 4 on the bottom button, once that distraction leaves the environment that you're in, you're going to dial back down to maybe a 1 or 2 on the bottom button. If more distractions come into the environment, you're dialing up to a 3, you're tapping the button, you may be holding it if you're healing and you're making a turn and he's completely focused on whatever's behind you as you turn and he's not turning with you, then you're going to go ahead and dial up and hit the bottom button. I recommend that when you first start working with the equipment, I compare it to any sport that you may have had throughout your life, whether it was tennis or golf or football or whatever it may have been, that you give yourself some time to learn the equipment. And also I would recommend that you start out with a keen on a leash. I do not recommend, which unfortunately some families have done, is to start at great distance off leash. What Keen is going to be assessing about you is your leadership skills. So he's going to be looking at each individual's leadership capabilities and responding either on command or off command, depending on what he's evaluating. The most important tips I can give you is do not look Keen in the eyes. I always look directly above his head or use my peripheral vision to check completeness of command. This is true for all dogs in my program, and I highly recommend that. I highly recommend that you save your affection, heavy petting and that, till after he's on his break, his release command, because it adds a lot of energy, and when you add a lot of energy, then you have to dial up on the remote to get a response for a command that normally you may not have to dial up on the remote for. I'm going to quickly just run through his commands, and I'm going to start with his release command. And once I give it, it doesn't matter how long he remains in that command, that's totally up to you. I try to let families know it's like having a conversation while you're moving from one command to another. Keen break. Good boy. And you can just do normal things with him in his release command. This is where you can do a lot of the petting and woo, adding lots of energy. Woo. And then I know I may or may not be setting myself up for success if I want a command right away after that particular scenario. Keen sit. And notice the change in my voice. Notice I gave him a hand signal. So he had several inputs. No push on the button. There was no leash guidance. Break. Okay, so that was the break command. We did sit. We did wait. I'm going to go to the end of the leash. I'm going to go ahead and do keen come, recall. And again, with the come command, it's an imaginary circle. If you extended your hands and drew a imaginary circle around your body, he can come within the space, sit, stand, it doesn't matter, just so he doesn't leave the space until I either give usually another command. The place command is a boundary training command. I've been using a bed cot for the past couple weeks. The most important thing about the place command for keen success is to use your right foot and right arm. Again, place is a directional command. Where you point is where the dog is going to go. So I have been doing the 1 step forward. Your left foot is stationary, 1 step with your right foot, and pointing with your right arm. I'm right-handed, so I have the remote in my right hand. Keen place. And there you go with that. Last 2 commands I'm going to discuss are follow and heel. Follow is the informal loose leash walking command. The dog can be in front, behind, or to either side. With heel, a formal loose leash walking command, the dog is at my left knee, his shoulder. He's not too far ahead, he's not too far back. He moves when my feet moves. When my feet stop, he sits. And always start off with your left foot. He was taught to heel on the left side. The dog learns the heel command even though I give a command of follow. You've been noticing over the past 2 weeks that he follows on the left side. And that's just normal once they've learned the heel command. So let's go ahead. We're gonna check out our follow and heel command. Again, I recommend during the transition that you initially start using a leash before going off leash to make sure, again, that you're comfortable with operating the equipment. Keen, follow. Okay, so we have a nice loose leash. We also have him visually checking in and focused, and that's what we want. So let's go ahead and switch him to a heel, keen heel. So the dog comes up. And he auto sits. The follow and the heel command are on what I call autopilot. He knows when my feet move to be moving with me. I just need to tell him which command he's in. If I don't, then he just moves with me, and usually it's in a follow command. The come command, the dog is not mature in understanding when somebody calls him, who called him. And we're going to demonstrate that in just a moment. Whichever person didn't call him, if he goes to that person, he's not wrong. He's within their circle. He's just not mature in his command to know that I called him. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that. Rick's going to call him.
Keen, come.
He's a border collie. He's smart. He got it on the first try, and we have not rehearsed this, so that's awesome. Most dogs would just stay here by me because they recognize that I was probably the one that called them, even though I didn't. So that's kind of cool that he understood. So I'm going to back up a little bit. Keen, come.
Keen, come.
Okay, so remember with the come command, it always gets a button push. So when Rick called the dog, since I have the remote, I gave the button push. And that's the responsibility that the person who has the remote always has, that the command gets completed. With the come command, it's also very important that once the dog reaches the circle, that you just touch. I would recommend that you don't pet because that takes the dog off task and doesn't set them up for success.